theology that he gets right, or morals that he gets right. I want to talk about the stories of the prophets, because the Quran is 6,000 plus verses, and it contains 1,100 verses about stories of the prophets. That's a whole 1/6 of the Quran, meaning if he gets any of those 1/6 of the Quran stories wrong, then he's not a prophet, right? And so, for example, in 12 verse 3, this is the chapter of Joseph, right? Allah is saying, before this, Muhammad, you didn't know anything about the story of Joseph, and he reveals 98 verses in detail about Joseph, and he closes this chapter in verse 111 by saying, this is a confirmation of the previous scriptures and a detailed explanation of all things. So it's a confirmation also in its details. And so I read the 98 verses, but then when I go and I search the Torah's version of Joseph, I find incredible amounts of differences, and they're irreconcilable too. Sometimes it's like, oh, maybe he was this age, and they're irreconcilable, and there's 944 differences just in those 98 verses of Joseph. And to me, that's really hard to reconcile. And the only reason Muhammad would be a true prophet revealing the correct Quran is that if the Quran's account of the prophets do match up, and you probably know verse 10, verse 94.
Yes, I do.
It says, if you're in doubt, go and read, or go and ask
those who read the scriptures before you.
And the context of that is right before, it's stories of Moses, Noah, Moses, Aaron, Noah, other prophets, and then when the Israelites are settling in the promised land, all these things, which are all stories you can find in the Old Testament. And so if the people in the 7th century are in doubt that Muhammad's revealing all these stories of the prophets, they have to go and read the previous scripture. And so when we go and look at not only the 7th century text, but the Dead Sea Scrolls from the 250s, and
okay, perfect. I want to touch on that because it's interesting that you brought up specifically Surah Yusuf, or the story of Joseph. So we believe that the Quran is a confirmation of the previous scriptures. It's detailed everywhere. However, we believe that the Quran comes and it corrects aspects of the previous scriptures that were changed by the hands of man. For example, we have this in Surah Al-Ma'idah verse 15. Wait, hold on. So in Surah Al-Ma'idah, Surah 5 verse 15, we have detailed in the tafsir, it says that the Quran comes to correct the alterations and the changes and so on and so forth. And it's interesting that you brought up the story of Joseph, because that's also an instance of the Quran correcting the Old Testament. So let me ask you, in the Old Testament where it talks about Joseph's story, is the sovereign in his time addressed as a pharaoh or a king in the Bible?
So you're talking about the anachronistic putting of Pharaoh's name, right? So the way you...
No. What I'm asking is, I'm just asking, is he addressed as a pharaoh or a king?
In the Torah?
Yes, in the Old Testament.
In the Old Testament, he is addressed as pharaoh, because we don't believe that, I don't know, me personally, I believe Moses wrote the Torah, right? It was revealed to him, but I don't think that he compiled it. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So I think it's okay that later on someone wrote in the word pharaoh. I know it doesn't come until later. Do you know?
Wait, so if you believe that it's divinely, do you believe that the